Dr. Weinberg, how do you document the results of an autopsy or the conduct of an autopsy?
There's a few different ways. So one is just with handwritten notes. It's literally nothing more than me writing notes on sheets of paper to document the findings. I also document my findings photographically. So that's a big part of modern forensic pathology practice. Lots of digital photographs of pertinent positive and negative examination findings. And then probably the most formal part is for each case, I produce a typed formal written report of my examination findings. And at the completion of that case, I sign and date that document.
Dr. Weinberg, you mentioned that you take photos. Is it common for police officers or law enforcement officials to also be present when an autopsy is conducted?
It depends on the nature of the case. Actually, probably for the majority of my cases, the answer is no. But in certain kinds of cases, cases that may involve future criminal charges, then yes, it is common for law enforcement to be in attendance, and often he or she will take photographs for themselves as well.
Dr. Weinberg, as part of an autopsy, do you determine something called cause of death?
Yes.
What does it mean to determine the cause of death?
The cause of death is the underlying disease process, injury, or intoxication that accounts for an individual's death, no matter how rapidly or how drawn out the time process involved. So examples of causes of death are medical issues such as various forms of cancer, strokes, various forms of cardiovascular disease, as well as injuries. So things like stab wounds, gunshot wounds, asphyxial injuries such as hanging or strangulation. Those are all various types of cause of death that I can put on a death certificate based on the totality of my examination and investigational findings in a case.
Dr. Weinberg, could you tell us how many autopsies have you conducted in your career?
I can't tell you an exact number because I don't keep that precise a log, but at this point in my career, about 14 years post-fellowship, it has to be just to either side of 3,000 at this point.
Dr. Weinberg, of those roughly 3,000 autopsies that you have conducted, how many involved gunshot wounds?
Hundreds.
Dr. Weinberg, have you been qualified in court as an expert in forensic pathology on previous occasions?
Yes.
Could you tell us about how many times?
Probably approaching 100 at this point, in the various jurisdictions in which I've worked and testified.
Does that include being qualified as an expert in forensic pathology in the state of New Hampshire?
Yes, multiple times at this point, yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state moves to qualify Dr. Weinberg as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection.
He shall be so recognized.
Dr. Weinberg, did you conduct an autopsy on the body of Caytlyn Naffziger on March 1st of 2024?
Yes.
Where was this autopsy performed?
At Concord Hospital in Concord, New Hampshire.
As part of that autopsy, did you determine Ms. Naffziger's height and weight?
I did.
What were those?
If I may at this point, may I refer to my case file, which has a copy of the autopsy report?
Yes, please refer to your report for purposes of refreshing your memory.
Sure. So Ms. Naffziger was 60 inches or 5 feet tall and 114 pounds.
Dr. Weinberg, I'll ask you to just close your notes.
Sure.
Dr. Weinberg, you talked about the number of ways that you document an autopsy, including photographs and then a report. Did you do those things with regard to Ms. Naffziger's autopsy?
Yes.
Did you conduct an external examination of Ms. Naffziger's body?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you find?
Well, along with just the routine things that I document in every case, things like hair color, eye color, scars, tattoos, presence or absence thereof, things like that. The most significant thing is there were two very obvious defects to the head, which I quickly was able to recognize as gunshot wound injury.
You mentioned that there were two defects that you described as a gunshot injury. Could you describe, did you assign any sort of classification to those injuries?
Yes. During the course of the examination, ultimately I was able to determine that one of the defects represented an entry wound and the other defect represented an exit wound. Therefore, I was able to determine that there was a single gunshot wound to the head with both entry and exit wounds present.
So I'd like to ask you about that. What is an entry wound?
An entry wound is the term that a forensic pathologist will use for the defect, the injury, the hole, where the bullet enters an individual's body.
And following that, what is an exit wound?
So same sort of thing, except now we're talking about from where the bullet exits the body. Every gunshot wound has to have some sort of entry. Not every gunshot wound has an exit. Some gunshot wounds have a retained projectile, but that was not so in this case.
How are you able to determine the difference between an entry wound and an exit wound?
Largely, it is a product of my training and experience at this point. Simply put, they look different, and it is my training and experience that allows me to make that distinction. Most of the time, it's pretty straightforward for an experienced forensic pathologist to differentiate an entry wound from an exit wound. They look different. They have different characteristics, different features, and that's just externally. There are also internal features that can help with that distinction when necessary. Everything in this case did align with the ultimate way I classified, as one side being the entry wound and the other side being the exit wound.
Dr. Weinberg, you mentioned an entry wound and an exit wound, and then you classified them collectively as a gunshot wound. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
So is it your opinion that that entry wound and that exit wound were caused by the same bullet?
Yes.
Could you tell us where those wounds were?
Yes, and again, I just want to refer to my notes because I don't want to switch the laterality.
Sure.
Excuse me, not my notes. I'm actually looking at the formal autopsy report. So in Miss Naffziger's case, the entry wound is on the left side of the head, on the temporal scalp, which basically means the portion of the head above the ear. So approximately in that general region where I'm pointing on myself, just for demonstrative purposes to the jury, but for the written record, I'm pointing slightly above my left ear. That was the entry wound in this case.
Where was the exit wound?
The exit wound was basically just on the opposite side, so on the right side, also a little bit above the right ear.
Dr. Weinberg, were you able to determine the bullet's course of travel through Ms. Naffziger's head?
Yes.
What was it?
The bullet passed through the skull and then basically passed through the brain. The report documents the specific anatomic structures in the brain, which I can get into if necessary, but essentially the bullet passed right through Ms. Naffziger's brain.
After passing through her brain, did it then exit through her skull again?
Yes, so passed through the left side of the skull, through the brain, and then through the right side of the skull, and then exited the body through the skin.
Did you recover a retained projectile from anywhere inside Ms. Naffziger's body?
No, I did not in this case.
Dr. Weinberg, you told us about the path that bullet traveled, in your expert opinion. Did you observe any internal injuries to Ms. Naffziger associated with that bullet?
Well, yes, the injuries to the skull, the dura mater, which is the covering around the brain, and the brain were all injured by the gunshot wound in this case. They were injured by the bullet.
And could you describe just what was your diagnosis of those injuries for the record?
You mean
what were the injuries?
Go specifically through the
Yes.
parts of the brain? Sure. I'm again going to refer to my report here, but the bullet passes through the left temporal cerebrum, cerebral white matter, and deep nuclei, such as the basal ganglia and the thalamus, the right frontotemporal cerebrum, and the right, and then out through the skull. So again, those are just specific anatomic regions of the cerebrum, which is kind of the main portion of the brain that people think about when you think of a picture of the brain.
Did you observe anything along the lines of hemorrhaging or contusions to parts of Ms. Naffziger's brain?
Yes, there was bleeding, which is absolutely expected, associated with any sort of traumatic injury in a living person, including a gunshot wound. There were also areas of associated bruising on the surface of the brain. These are all, just to be clear, injuries that are directly associated, and findings, I should say, associated with the gunshot wound.
Dr. Weinberg, were the injuries to Ms. Naffziger's brain from that gunshot wound
surface? And there's basically three classifications or three groupings that I make when I assess range of fire in a gunshot wound case.
Dr. Weinberg, I believe the question posed to you was, what is range of fire?
Sure. So I think I was at a point where I was explaining that as a forensic pathologist, we classify range of fire into one of three categories. And it, again, relates to the distance between the tip of the weapon and the skin surface at the time of discharge. So the first category is contact, which basically means the gun is up against the skin at the time of discharge. The second grouping is intermediate range of fire, which basically means from a few inches away up to about 3 feet. That's the intermediate range of fire, and then beyond that is a distant range of fire, or indeterminate, or, as the phrasing I use, no evidence of close range firing. So intermediate and contact are considered close range firing. That is, the tip of the weapon is less than about 3 feet from the tip of the skin.
I'm going to ask you again to define those three categories of fire.
Okay. So the first category of range of fire is contact, which means the tip of the weapon is basically up against the skin surface up to maybe a couple of inches away. Intermediate range of fire means that the gun tip is a little bit further back. Usually it's defined as somewhere between 6 and 36 inches away from the skin surface. That's the intermediate range of fire. And again, in combination, contact and intermediate are lumped as close range firing. If you don't see any of the markers of either contact or intermediate range of firing, the gunshot wound is defined as an indeterminate range of fire or distant range of fire, or the phrasing I use in my reports, no evidence of close range firing. And again, that generally means that the tip of the weapon is at least 3 feet away or more.
So Dr. Weinberg, when you determine that something is in that last category as not close range or indeterminate, you can't tell if something is 37 inches or 37 feet, can you?
That's correct.
You mentioned markers that you use to determine whether a gunshot wound falls into one of these three categories. What are those markers?
Those markers are the presence of soot around a wound, as well as imprints from the muzzle or other parts of the gun, such as a sight or a firing pin. Those are things that are generally seen in the contact range of fire. Intermediate range of fire is classically defined with the presence of something called gunpowder stippling, which are basically these tiny little pinpoint marks around a gunshot wound from gunpowder particles striking the skin. But once you get beyond about 3 feet or 36 inches, those markers generally are not going to be present, and therefore, as I said, you have no evidence of close range firing, and you can opine that the gun is 3 feet or more away from the skin surface at the time of discharge.
Dr. Weinberg, with regard to Ms. Naffziger, did you observe any of those marks that you described as evidence of close or intermediate range firing?
No, no such markers were present in this case.
So in your opinion, were the wounds that you observed on Ms. Naffziger in that third category of indeterminate or distant fire?
Yes, in my opinion, the entry gunshot wound in this case shows no evidence of close range firing.
And again, that means 3 feet or more.
Correct.